Happy Monday, friends. I'm oiling up a second time because I just went live and did this whole video. All the emotion and everything that came with it, and realized I had messed up my microphone through my computer, and none of it recorded with sound or audio. So if you caught that live just now, accidents happen. I'm sorry. Here we go again. Take two. It was meant to be for some reason. So here we are. Hey, I'm Adele Cole, by the way, if you haven't met me before, and I make mistakes, but I am your holistic Lyme warrior mama, here to tell you that healing is possible. And I can show you some ways to get to a state of healing, regardless of your Lyme diagnosis or other tick-borne illness diagnoses, so you can live your best life. Diagnosis be damned. All right. We don't need to live in a state of illness, disease, or diagnosis. We are who we are. I'm here for that journey. All right. We are created to be well and to be our best, brightest, most vibrant selves. My journey to get to healing is ongoing. It's still occurring. I'm not technically in remission yet by definition, but I am the healthiest I have been since I was a child. So that being said, if you missed part 1 of my story, which I've been sharing my journey this month as part of Lyme Disease Awareness Month, at the time of this recording, it is May. And so I invite you to make sure you check out part 1, because I'm not going to have time to recap the whole thing, or we'll never get to the end of my journey. It's been a long journey. This healing journey, Lyme and everything, started around age 11 for me, and I am in my mid-30s now, so it's been a while. But as you can see, we're getting somewhere. We're getting somewhere. So I have hope for you along the way, and it hasn't been a straight shot. Lots of twists, turns, curves, ups and downs, corkscrews even. But that doesn't mean you got to stop or be derailed from your goals. And I'm glad that even though sometimes it felt like I was a little derailed, I never stayed there, and we got where we are today. Okay. And it has paid off. The effort has paid off. I am not here, disclaimer, as a provider, though, to treat, cure, diagnose, or tell you that what I did is going to work for you, because everybody's different. And that's another part of my message to everybody. Our bodies are different. Our genetics are different. Our environments are different. And so I can give you ideas, and I can tell you the truth of my journey. And if that inspires you or helps you on yours, that's why I'm here. Okay. But this is not a substitute for collaborating with a trusted provider or team of providers for your individual needs. All right. So let's jump into part 2, which I affectionately call Empowerment Rising, because even though at the time of this part of my story, I was still around like 15 to 17 years old as it's occurring, I was learning all about empowerment medically, and taking ownership of my health and advocating for my health at a young age, but it paid off. And I'll show you how indirectly. It's now that I can look back on it and see, oh my gosh, all that I learned. But in the middle of it all, it was a chore. It was hard. It was scary to be approaching doctors about what was wrong with me as a kid who maybe didn't even understand medicine or medical stuff. But gosh darn it, I tried, and I did get somewhere, and you'll see that in my journey. So where we left off in part 1 is I finally had a Lyme diagnosis from my family doctor, who was not Lyme literate, but he tried his best. He tried to help me. He put me on a month of doxy, and then told me if that was helpful, he would be willing to entertain IV antibiotics, which he felt like would be like the next step. He was possibly wrong, and that wasn't the best treatment option, but it was better than not doing anything. And again, he tried. So we did the month of doxy, and I was so sick, you guys. Looking back, not only was it destroying my gut, which was not optimized, I did not have optimal gut health at the time, but it also was causing me a Herxheimer reaction, which is often known as herxing in the Lyme community. If you don't know what that is, look it up, because I don't have time to explain the whole thing to you right now. But it is, in short, kind of like detox reaction related to die off from your Lyme disease, dying off faster than your body can eliminate it because your detox pathways are not optimized, or your treatment is too much too fast, or it can be for a variety of reasons. And it can be dangerous. And that's what I do want to say. Safety side note, herxing can be dangerous in some instances and should never be taken lightly, and isn't necessarily even an expectation of treatment, although it often happens with Lyme treatment, right? This doctor, I didn't know what it was. He didn't know what it was. Thankfully, I was safe and made it through without proper oversight of this herxing. And it was only looking back after I learned what I did in my adult years that I knew that's what I was going through then. So I'm feeling worse. My gut health is worse. So you can imagine by the end of that month of doxy, I'm like, no, thanks. We're done. Don't need any IV antibiotics. That didn't help me at all. He was like, all right, well, then, good luck. And he recommended basically that I seek out specialists to help me with my individual diagnoses and needs, which turned out to mostly be autoimmune related for me. But as you may not yet know, Lyme can affect any body system, any organ, and can cause a lot of different symptoms. So for me, like I said, it was primarily rheumatological type symptoms and autoimmune type symptoms that were the worst, at least, or that were the most prominent. So what ended up happening is this is how my empowerment started to rise up in me. I had my mama and myself as our best advocates, and we had the help of some trusted, close friends that were medically inclined or part of the medical community themselves that did help us along the way too. And I got to give them credit for that help, or else it might have looked different for my outcomes. But we basically saw results because of what I say was our open-mindedness and our willingness to dig for answers, and the fact that divine intervention does happen. And it did, as you will see in my story, in a few places that led us down the right path at the end of the day when we didn't know what path maybe to take. My empowerment really started when I started looking around me at I knew some other friends that actually were battling some chronic conditions themselves. Might have been Lyme, might not have been, but they didn't have a Lyme diagnosis. And I was seeing what they were going through, and I started learning from them, and I started asking a lot of questions, and sometimes asking the right questions can be super helpful. And then I started doing my own digging and my own research, and the internet was kind of a newer thing back then when I was 20 years ago, when I was 15. But I started digging a little bit, started researching a little bit. And I know not everyone enjoys that. I happen to love that kind of stuff, but this is how I started to realize that this was part of who I was, an investigator. And it allowed me some lessons in empowerment for myself and ownership. Again, that's a big word when you're sick or you're desiring change. You have to take ownership of what's going on. And I started to do that. And my mom supported that and also helped me through that as well. Simply having my parents believe me was a great help and a great step forward. But even if they didn't understand, they encouraged my findings and my researching and my presenting my findings to my doctors. And it was through that I actually got some misdiagnoses, but still learned some valuable lessons. So my research led me to believe that I was developing or had developed conditions such as fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, forms of arthritis, those kinds of things. It also led me to not dismiss symptoms I was having and to track and take seriously symptoms I was having. So I, through the encouragement of a physical therapist at that time and my parents, started seeking specialists in rheumatology, infectious disease, maybe some other specialists as well. But bottom line is I landed with a rheumatologist that was willing to listen and willing to collaborate and didn't necessarily think that they had all the answers, but believed me. And between my rheumatologist and my PCP that were willing to work with me and collaborate and be on my team, we ended up getting some of these diagnoses. They validated my research and my thoughts and my journey this far. And this is maybe the short list, but the prominent diagnoses that I ended up with at this time were fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, psoriatic arthritis, including psoriasis, eczema, migraines, sacroiliac joint dysfunction, Raynaud's phenomenon, patellofemoral disorder, and maybe a few other things. I was also soon into this journey, little sneak peek of what was to come, was going to be worked up for IBS and other gut autoimmune conditions and mental health disorders as a result of Lyme or because of dealing with chronic illness as a child and its life-changing effects, vasovagal syndrome. And then down the road a little further, again, another sneak peek, spoiler alert, I was going to be headed down a path of a lupus workup and heavier duty medications over the years, which I didn't know at the time. I'm 15 and this is all starting, but by young adulthood, I was looking at methotrexate as an immunosuppressant because the other ones weren't working for me. Shocking, because Lyme was just thriving in my immunosuppressed body and making things worse instead of better. Go figure, right? So didn't know all this at 15, but started down the path of autoimmune diagnoses. And you heard the laundry list of where I kind of ended up then with that, but it felt like answers to me at the time. We thought the Lyme was like going to be what it was going to be, and that wasn't a factor anymore. So we pursued what the rheumatologist recommended and felt like it was our next best option. Even though I wasn't headed down the path to healing at this point, you will see the twists and turns. We're going to lead me back there. All right. But for the meantime, I had learned valuable lessons in medical advocacy and empowerment and ownership for myself that would carry me into adulthood. Because if you don't learn them when you're younger, you're going to learn them eventually. If you encounter any kind of health crisis or problem that requires you to stick up for yourself. I love the medical community. Because of all of this, I actually ended up as a nurse. So I'm not dissing the medical community in any way. I'm a nurse myself. Love plenty of healthcare professionals dearly, but they're human. And plenty of them also have misinformed attitudes about how healthcare should look. We all come from our own journey and our own space and place. So I'm just here to say that before anyone is all over me about dissing medicine. I'm not. I had some good doctors that did the right thing they could by me with the information they knew. And I hold no hard feelings against them. In fact, I'm grateful for what they tried to give me, even if it didn't lead to my ultimate healing, because I still got there anyway, right? It's going to happen. What's meant for you will happen for you. So sticking to my notes, I went through all these ups and downs, finally was getting some answers and basically helping to self-diagnose my autoimmune conditions, but it was legitimate. And it was, again, it felt like answers, even though it also felt hopeless because I didn't think you could heal from autoimmune conditions back then, which I since have changed my beliefs on as well. That is neither here nor there. Because two specific things came across our path, specifically across my mom's path, because she on her own right was doing advocacy work for me. She was using her resources and her connections and keeping her eyes and ears open to options for me along this path as well. And because of her willingness to try some unusual things, because we were kind of desperate for answers, we started to get some answers and to make some headway without even knowing what a Lyme literate provider was or without even realizing we needed to be treating Lyme. So this part of my journey does not involve more Lyme treatment, but it involves healing. And here's how. The first thing that came across our path divinely was myofascial release. My mom came in contact with a very local myofascial release provider, which is a form of body work. It's often lumped into the massage therapy category, though it's technically not that, but it's okay. We're not splitting hairs for all intents and purposes. So we hooked up with this myofascial release provider who was excellent. I continued to see her, by the way, again, spoiler alert, until this past year when she retired in her 80s. She changed my life. And this is where I get choked up because I went to her when I was 15 and I saw her regularly for about 10 years, even through college and into adulthood. And then more sporadically, but still periodically until now in her retirement. We have become dear, dear friends. And that's what chokes me up about it, because it's one thing to experience healing and it's another thing to make a friend, like a quality bosom friend, to quote Anne of Green Gables. in the process, and I did in this provider. The first time I saw her changed my life instantly. And I'm not exaggerating. I was only 15 years old. I didn't understand health and healing the way I do now, for sure. And I was only starting on my journey to health and healing. I didn't know about detoxing and gut health and healing the immune system and all these facets of healing, Lyme providers and, treatment options. I didn't know any of that, but I knew I felt better after one session with her. And I know myofascial release might not be for everybody. It happened to be for me a big, big, huge, huge healing factor in my journey. I'm not saying it's for everyone. To each his own. But my provider took a picture of me, and I wish I had it with me today. It's tucked away in a photo album somewhere. I will never get rid of it, and I will find it again when it's meant to be found. She took a picture of me after my session, and the first words out of my mouth to my mom, who drove me there and waited for me during my session, were these. Because my mom looked at me and started crying without any words. And she said, "How do you feel?" Because she could see the change in me. And I said, I wasn't prepared for that question even yet. I was so shell-shocked at how I felt, so much better. And the first words out of my mouth were, "I can breathe again." I hadn't realized that for years, I couldn't even take a deep breath because of pain and restriction in my body. My friends, do not underestimate the healing power of oxygen, of sleep, of good care of your body. These baby steps are the key to healing right there and then. I knew it, and I've never looked back since. Allow me to take a deep breath. I was hooked, needless to say, and my healing journey only escalated because of her therapeutic touch and abilities. And she also added in some other great stuff throughout the years with me: lymphatic drainage, craniosacral massage. But it was that myofascial release session that started me on this path of believing in the hope of healing for myself. The second thing that came along right around that same time was us getting connected with a homeopathist. It's a long story how it happened, but my mom being open and willing to trying that out was one of the best things for me in the long run. No, he wasn't Lyme literate. He was also a MD, a medical provider that had ventured into homeopathy and holistic care, functional medicine, whatever you want to call it, for others. It was the first time I had lab work done to the degree it was done. The first time any provider had asked me questions about my lifestyle and my actual body functions that actually made a difference. And while he didn't dismiss the Lyme disease thing, he treated me for where I was at in my healing journey, and it actually made huge strides for me. He addressed gut health, and he addressed my pain, and he addressed my mental health and healing, and many, many other factors in ways I had never experienced before. I actually talked a little bit about my gut healing journey with him in a different video I did specifically about my gut healing journey only, and two major points of pivot for me in healing my gut. And that was the first one, was seeing him and being introduced to the Schwarzbein principle diet back then, which is still relevant today, written by Dr. Schwarzbein. And it's a very relevant whole foods style healing, nutritionally dense way of eating that I still use to this day, 20 years later, as parts of my diet, tenets of my way of eating. Anyway, really fabulous. Look into it if you're, curious, because now I never in my life have heard anyone talk about it other than this particular provider. And it was an excellent piece of advice for our whole family, actually, who it started to change the way we looked at what we thought healthy eating was. And I started to feel better with these two things: myofascial release and a homeopathist on board, treating me from a totally different perspective. I didn't have Lyme treatment, a Lyme literate provider. No one's talking about Lyme, but I'm starting to get better. And you will see in part 3 how this set me up for the next stage of my life, which was entering adulthood, college, career, family of my own, starting out on my own, and taking that empowerment and ownership that I was learning to be my best advocate for myself medically, taking that out on my own and figuring it out from there. But you'll see how it all worked out in the end. Stay tuned. Make sure you're liking and subscribing if you're catching this on YouTube Live or the replay. And make sure you're getting involved in what I have to offer below. You want to get in our holistic Lyme healing community chat where we talk even more about the details of the stuff I'm talking about here, about healing your whole body and your whole person. I'll catch you guys there. Bye for now. Stay tuned for next week's installment of part 3 of my journey to healing Lyme.